mindfulness itself. And introspection, does that refer to the practice of it? Or am I saying that mindfulness, that mental factor, needs all three? Well, actually it refers to the complete practice. So mindfulness should be, like Buddha Gosha says, it is based on noting, that is alertness, plus it is related to introspection. So it's kind of like saying, there are other practices such as love and compassion. You also need a certain degree of mindfulness, you need a certain degree of comprehension, etc. But that doesn't mean love and compassion is that degree of comprehension and so forth. But to make the practice complete, you need all the other aspects. So similarly, mindfulness just in and of itself would not be effective enough. Yes, for the practice, you need the other parts.
I mean, it's just in our daily life. We have mindfulness. I go to the supermarket to buy a carton of milk. I have mindfulness to remember where I'm going, why I'm going there.
Right.
So I'm not talking about practice, but just in daily life. Is present in our minds.
So the question is then also with regard to the mindfulness itself, isn't it present in our daily life? When going to the supermarket, I want to buy milk, I have to remember I want to buy milk, just taking me there, etc. And of course, absolutely yes. We have what is described as mindfulness in the sense of just that remembrance, a certain degree, based on a certain degree of alertness. Then we remember to keep the object in mind. So that remembrance can mean we remember the object, but also once we've taken it to mind, we keep holding on to the object for as long as necessary. So for as long as we've bought the milk, basically. And so introspection here, the thing is, what we mean with mindfulness here, strictly speaking, is mindfulness that is aware of the body in a specific way, feeling, mind, and then other phenomena that are relevant to our practice. So the phenomena we need to adopt, the phenomena we need to avoid. So earlier on, yesterday I also talked about the fact we are mindful when someone insults us. So I think in my case I'm definitely much more mindful of that than of milk when I buy milk. So it's like, someone said something, it goes on in my mind, So there's definitely bringing it to mind again and again. There's alertness. So in that sense, yes, but I think what mindfulness really refers to, mindfulness is defined not only by its function, but also by the object itself. So instead of focusing on a sense object, as we usually do, on something another person said, for instance, or an event in the past, etc., but actually basically, an event of the past means like, I don't know, a vacation I took and so forth. Instead of that, focusing on the experiencer, the mind itself, focusing on feeling, on love, compassion. For instance, if I was angry in the morning and my anger just raged or did its thing for, let's say, 5 minutes, to go back and watch each moment. As much as I can remember, go back. How did it unfold? How did this first moment of perception give rise to this perception, that, and eventually anger, in order to understand it better? Or even right now, as I'm in the present, right now, I feel stressed out. I'm stressed out about something. I'm anxious about something. I'm depressed about something. Certain negative states of mind that are quite overwhelming as they arise. Usually not mentioned, so depression, fear, anxiety are not really mentioned in the same way as anger and so forth, but they're still debilitating, they're still harmful. So instead of watching the object of that anxiety, depression and so forth, I watch the actual mind. I just watch the actual awareness itself. That, I would say, would qualify to be called mindfulness in this particular context. Right? Yeah.
But even in everyday life, all three are has to, I think, it has to take part of it. If I drive and I'm talking to a friend while I'm driving, if I'm not minded to the way, I'll most definitely go wherever I'm used to, home, instead of to the doctor, which I wanted to stop. It's not the usual. All of a sudden, alertness can come. Wait a minute, where's your mind? You should go there and not there. It's part of life, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. So Leora is saying that we need those three: alertness, mindfulness, and introspection in our daily life. Otherwise, if I don't have that, I may take this wrong turn as I'm driving, and I'm unintentionally go somewhere else. Yes, that's true, just as with going to the supermarket. But those are means, mindfulness, alertness, introspection, so they are needed to live our normal life, everyday life. But here we take those awarenesses to live a happy life. First step, to make our life more happy, more meaningful, and possibly make practice towards becoming liberated and fully enlightened. So we take those tools. I mean, we can also say we need love in our everyday life. If we don't love our family and so forth, life would become very difficult. We need honesty in our everyday life. Yeah, we need all those, but we can do better. There's room for improvement with regard to those awarenesses. So the same is true for mindfulness. Yes, to be able to go shopping and driving a car, we need to do all that, but we can enhance it further to not only be able to live a reasonable life, be reasonably functioning in this world, but to give more meaning to this life, to be happier, to have less suffering. So basically these are all states of mind that are practical and helpful, just from the point of view of just mundane types of livings. But then if we want to enhance it, and that's spiritual practice, is all about taking our lives to a different level, giving our lives more meaning, more satisfaction, more contentment, by way of enhancing our love, compassion, and so forth, but of course also by understanding our mind better. So we're using the basics. We have the basics. We have basic wisdom. We need wisdom just to be able to go through elementary school. But with spiritual practice, we take that wisdom to a different level. So that's in a sense for me also what Buddha nature means, that we have those basic qualities already to a certain degree, but then we use those exact same qualities and enhance them. So oftentimes people ask this question, and that's just as a side thought. They asked me this question just now after class. Someone asked me, didn't the Buddha say don't trust your mind? Right? Or, similarly, our mind is deluded, our mind is afflicted. So basically you have a useless tool here. How can we use this useless tool to transform into the mind of a Buddha? It's a very good question. Well, first of all, I don't think the Buddha means don't trust any mind. It's all mistaken, it's all totally wrong. That would be how can you use your mind to meditate if every mind is wrong? I don't think that is meant with this statement. It means discern between those minds that are mistaken in those or wrong about their objects and those minds that perceive their objects, at least to some degree, get it right and work from there. But also this idea of our mind is totally polluted and deluded and what have you, contaminated. How can you transform it into a non-contaminated mind? That's like saying, I want to train my body. So I have an untrained body. How can I transform an untrained body into a trained body? Oh, I can't use this body. It's not flexible because it's an unflexible body. How can I use an unflexible body? Well, I use that same body because it has the potential to become flexible. It has that basic capacity. I can move, at least to some degree. It can move. So that body I use to then make it more flexible. So similarly, yeah, there are a lot of misperceptions we have, a lot of contaminations in the mind, but it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all like totally. We have the ability to know. We have the ability to discern. We are mindful to a certain degree. We are loving to a certain degree, compassionate. But it's all limited because of our obscurations. So it's a matter of removing those obscurations and expanding those qualities we already have. So in a way, that ability we can talk of as Buddha nature, those types of mind, the ability for the mind to change, to enhance, etc. But also those basic awarenesses that hold already the potential to become even more loving, even more mindful of the things that truly matter. Does that make sense? Ah, yes. Which one is first? That one. It's empty. It's empty. Most are all empty. Okay, wait, let me just find the ones that are not. Oh, here's one. What is the connection or the relation between close placement, that is wisdom or mindfulness, so close placement of mindfulness, one-pointed concentration and analytic meditation? That's Vada. Right? Okay, so what is the connection? Good question. So, what is the connection? How do they connect? How do they relate? The close placement of mindfulness, which is one of the two, mindfulness or wisdom. How does that relate to one point of concentration and to analytical meditation? Yeah, very good. How does it connect? How does it relate? What do you think? I'm doing the lazy way out. Ask you. No, seriously, what do you think?
The last meditation we did, I thought it was mindful and analytical meditation together. Am I wrong?
Okay, is she wrong? She thought it was analytic. Is she wrong? I'm asking. Is it the last meditation we did, and let's say the one before it too, is that analytical meditation with also the mental, so having the aspect of analytical meditation, the mind that analyzes, in other words, and a mind that is mindful? What do you think? Yes. First of all, what is mindfulness again? What is it? The ability, it's the type of awareness that remembers its object, that stays with its object, that remembers its object. That's mindfulness. In order to be, let's take single point of concentration. What is single point of concentration? Yes? It's a type of consciousness that is able to hold its object not just for 1 second, not just for 2 seconds, we can all do that. 3, 4, 5, 6, possibly 4 hours on end. That's usually one way of measuring whether we have a certain type of concentration, which is described as calm abiding. 4 hours. With great clarity and stability, you're able to stay with the same object. Now, how does that relate to mindfulness? Staying with the object, yes? What did you say? So based on mindfulness, if I want to stay with the same object for 4 hours, that's how many seconds? Anyone? Anyway, many seconds, thousands of seconds, so however many seconds they are. So with regard to in each I have to stay with that to remember. It's the breathing. No, it's not tomorrow's lunch. It's the breathing. Oh no, it's not the person snoring next to me. It's the breathing. Right? Again and again. To take the so that ability to go back to the object, that ability has mindfulness has that ability. Right? So you need to have a mind that is mindful. You need to have a mind that is focused. So different awarenesses that are needed. So you cannot be single-pointedly focused. You cannot be concentrated if you don't have mindfulness. If you keep in other words, if you don't have mindfulness, you don't remember the object. If you don't remember the object, you're scattered, which is the opposite of single-pointed concentration. Right? So very important to have mindfulness in order to be able to focus on an object for an extended period of time. I think like going back to this original question, are we able to focus? Of course we have. We have basic concentration because we have basic mindfulness. We can stay with an object for at least 2 or 3 seconds, because if we didn't have a certain period of time that we stay on the object, we couldn't know the object. You need to stay with an object for however long it takes to know it. Right? If it just briefly arises, you cannot know it. It's too short. So the fact that we can actually know something such as shape and color and what have you, it has to appear to the mind for a certain period, and it's mindfulness that enables the mind to stay with the object. Right? It's a function, a basic function we all have. So therefore, in answer to your question, you need mindfulness for single-pointed meditation. And then the analytical meditation. What about the analytical meditation? What is analytical meditation? We're analyzing an object. Hopefully single-pointedly. Yes?
Analytical meditation belongs, it's an example for insight meditation, which traditionally, or theory, we only started, or it's based on having shamatha, which is a calm abiding. So we have to be able to focus on the object in order to start investigating it. Of course, in practice we do it all the time together, but so it has to be, it needs to have, it assumes that it has mindfulness. We have some degree of mindfulness in order to concentrate and do it. And since it's analytical, it has wisdom in it.
Okay, so what Leora is saying, traditionally analytical meditation is vipassana, special insight, and that must be based on concentration. And so therefore, even though what we do is just analytical meditation, is not necessarily vipassana, but still we do need a degree of concentration. Does that summarize what you said? Well, first of all, I would disagree. Analytical meditation is not vipassana. Vipassana is analytical meditation. What is special insight? When we talk about this particular word, vipassana, and here I'm not talking about vipassana as defined in the Pali tradition, slightly different. The word is used differently, but in the Sanskrit tradition or in the Mahayana tradition, as it is now known right now as like based on the Sanskrit texts. So, in the Sanskrit tradition, we talk about vipassana as a particular type of analytical meditation that is based on a very deep degree or high degree of concentration. In fact, that is based on calm abiding. So, special insight or vipassana is based on calm abiding or samadhi. So, without using the Sanskrit words, that may get confusing. So, basically, when we say special insight, it's a type of analytical meditation that is very potent because of the degree of concentration that is associated with it. Now, in order to understand this better, I think the process of getting there helps. To understand the process, it just doesn't take long to explain it, makes it easier to understand how potent it is. Usually, when we analyze, we cannot stay single-pointedly focused to the same degree that we can be focused when we just focus on one object. Because analysis requires movement of the mind. In other words, going back and forth between an object. Otherwise it wouldn't be analysis. Right? Like this, like that, like this. So usually our analytical meditation is very coarse. Or maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that. Our mind shifts very strongly. And so it's very likely to be disrupted because it's already in that movement, shifting between objects back and forth. And it's a very coarse kind of shift. So we're more likely to be distracted. This movement is already there, that function of going back and forth and back and forth. And then before long, there's something totally unrelated we start thinking about. And we lose the object. So therefore, that type of analysis is not as effective. So what is important, therefore, is to generate a strong degree of concentration. So the stronger our concentration, once we're able to combine it with the analytical meditation, the more powerful it becomes. So therefore, you train yourself in analytical meditation and concentration initially separately. You engage in those meditations at separate times. You have to, because if you do one, you can't do the other. If you analyze, your concentration goes. When you concentrate, you cannot analyze. So you practice those in alternation, in the sense when you do one, you don't do the other. And then what you do is, once you are able to focus for 4 hours with stability and clarity, then you focus on an object such as the breathing, okay, or Buddha's body. But let's take the breathing. You focus on it single-pointedly, and then you analyze the breathing. You rise from that single point of concentration, and you analyze what is happening. How do I breathe in? How do I breathe out? How long is the movement? Etc. I mean, it sounds boring, but there's definitely a lot we can analyze about the movement of the breath. So you analyze, and you go back to the focus, and you go back to the analysis, alternating, right? Again, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And if you do this long enough, you can bring the two together, such that now, while you're focused, you can continue to analyze. And while you analyze, you're still focused. You basically bring the two together. Think of it as like an exercise. Like you have to do two things at the same time. I don't know, like some kind of somersault, and at the same time move your hands or something, right? Somersault, you don't move your hands. I don't know what you do, but anyway, you do something. And so you can't do them simultaneously, but you do one, and then you do the other, you do the one, you do the other, and then you bring the two together until you can do both, right? Wiggle your toes and do a somersault or what have you. So here, similarly, you go back and forth. You alternate between concentrating, analyzing, concentrate, analyzing. So if you alternate quickly one after the other more and more, eventually your mind is able to do both at the same time. Okay? And that they describe as the ability, or they give the analogy of your mind being very still, like a still lake. But like a fish moving underneath the surface, moving very subtly, like very, very, very smoothly, moving very. So the surface is not disrupted. It's not like a shark going, or like a dolphin going. No, it's just this tiny fish. So that's the subtle analysis of your mind. Your mind is still analyzing, but it has a subtler quality that does not disturb the stillness of the mind. You're still very focused. Now that you would describe as calm abiding, or, as is also described, a union of calm abiding and special insight. Okay, sorry, that you would describe as special insight, or as a union of calm abiding and special insight. So that's special insight. Special insight is this subtle analysis that is able that is very focused, right? And therefore, the analysis that takes place is that is so subtle that it doesn't disturb the calmness of the mind. So in that sense, it's much more effective. It's just more powerful. And what we do right now is we're going through, the Tibetans give it a name like a similitude, jitumba in Tibetan. Like jitumba means like something, a likeness. It's not the real deal. I mean, what about bodhicitta? It's not the real deal, I'm afraid. It's a likeness, right? It's close enough. So similarly here, when we engage in those meditations, what we do is we start with focusing, then we analyze, and we end the meditation with focusing again. Right? So we go through the motions to some degree, and that's not the only reason we alternate. There are other reasons for that too, but that is already familiarizing our mind with that going back and forth. So that's an analytical meditation, but it's not as effective as the real deal.
So that's what we actually did.
So that's what we actually did. But for both, you see, even when you analyze, you need a certain degree of concentration. So that is only possible because of mindfulness. You need to hold on to the object. So again, it's not that when you analyze, we have no concentration at all. A certain degree is needed, but it's the degree of concentration we can generate now while we analyze is very limited. But nonetheless, we can generate some, and that is due to mindfulness, keeping with the object. Mm-hmm. Does it have a special name? Does it have a special name? I'm not aware of any special name. This at the very end, after analysis, when you're asked to focus on whatever feeling, whatever conclusion you've come to just allow for this to sink deeper by focusing on it. I don't know. I've never heard any special name. No, not that I'm aware of. It's no term that I'm aware of. Okay. Right, next one. Those are all empty. Oh. No questions. You're the only one. Seriously, we were serious about there's no questions? No question? Oh. All right, you were first. Oh. Well, you were first and then it's you. Yeah, please go ahead.
You mentioned that you cannot be mindful and say that the mind jumps between being alert and having the object. That you cannot be always mindful.
You cannot be always mindful.
It's like with the breath.
Yeah.
You have the sense consciousness.
Yeah. Yes. Oh.
Mindfulness only exists with mental consciousness?
Can mindfulness only exist with a mental consciousness? Can you have a sense consciousness that is mindful? No. Sense consciousness doesn't have that ability. It's a remembrance. A remembrance, by implication, means it's conceptual. It cannot be a sense consciousness. So I don't want to go into an explanation of what's conceptual mind, but anyway, it can only be mental. Now what I said yesterday, so this was also something Varda asked. So it's actually, I'm glad you bring it up because it is important. We are told to be mindful at all times. We're told to do something we can't do. What are you talking about? But it doesn't literally mean that in each moment. Here, first of all, mindfulness, like I said, mindfulness needs to be explained. The Buddhist type of mindfulness we're interested in is not the one that focuses on the road while we're driving, or that is the one, focusing on color and shape when we're thinking about color and shape, right? It's not that. It's rather, it's mindfulness of our own mind, for instance. So as I said earlier on, when we have the 5 sense consciousnesses, they cannot realize their object simultaneously. They are simultaneously there, but they don't register, for lack of a better word, their object simultaneously. So that is also true when you include the mental consciousness. For the mental consciousness to realize its object, the sense consciousnesses, for the time being, don't realize their objects. But since we're very good at moving back and forth, it seems to us it happens simultaneously. So mindfulness is an object ascertaining mind. It's a type of mental factor that is described as object ascertaining, which means it knows its object. It knows its object. So you know, for instance, your own anger. There's degrees of knowledge, right? As there's degrees of knowledge of this table. I look afar, I see a table, I have a coarse understanding of the table. The closer I get, the better my understanding. So similarly, my mindfulness, when it's aware of the anger, I understand something about the anger. I realize a certain degree of the anger. But I cannot be angry and at the same time be mindful of my own anger. I cannot have an eye consciousness realizing the color blue, knowing the color blue, and at the same time for a mental consciousness to know the eye consciousness, knowing the color blue. So it can only arise afterwards. Mindfulness, because it is something that you must have, mindfulness cannot be aware of a future mind arising, because it's a remembrance, it's a recollection. So therefore it must have been preceded by the object that is mindful of, and it cannot arise at the same time. You cannot at the same time realize blue as you realize the eye consciousness that realizes blue. Am I making sense? Yeah. So therefore, they don't arise simultaneously. It's impossible.
So the question is also when someone reaches calm abiding, is it also this shifting, still this shifting?
When someone reaches calm abiding, no, because in each moment you continue being focused. You focus for 4 hours, at least. Or let's say, even if you haven't reached calm abiding, but you're able to focus on the same object for 10 minutes. Anyone here can do that? So 10 minutes on just the breathing. So at that time, do you have a sense consciousness in those 10 minutes? No. No sense. Well, sense consciousness, yes, but your sense consciousness does not realize anything. It's an awareness to which the object appears, but is not ascertained.
So it's just a recollection in this 10 minutes?
Well, actually, you're not, to be honest, you're not 10 minutes focused. You're not focused without interruption. That's actually not possible if you focus on the breathing. If you focus on the breathing, you actually can't do that by definition, because you're aware of each moment of the breathing, right? So there must be a moment where the body consciousness registers but there's no other distractive thought. So when you take the breathing as your object, if you take a Buddha's image as your object, you're just focusing on this image that you've conjured up as a result of memory. In this case, just the Buddha image. If you just think of something that you don't need to continuously observe, then the mental consciousness. But the breathing really needs to be interrupted by the body consciousness. The tactile sensation of the breathing needs to register. Unless you're not observing your breathing, you're just remembering the breathing. But usually that's not how it's done. So yes, in answer to your question, when you observe the breathing, it needs to be interrupted by the body consciousness perceiving, realizing the breathing, and then you go back to the concentration. But then you're still pretty much focused, basically focused, because there's no interruption, there's no disruption, no scatteredness with regard to the mental consciousness. It's just in that slight moment in between, it doesn't realize its object, but it still appears to it. So there's the difference here. It still appears, you don't lose the object, but it's not realized. Right? There's still an object there, but in that moment when the breath is realized, the mental consciousness doesn't realize its object. That's it. But you could debate that. I'm sure there is debate on that, because it's very clear with the sense consciousnesses that they cannot arise simultaneously. I'm sure someone would disagree, saying that you can realize something with a sense consciousness and a mental consciousness at the same time. But I'm following an explanation I once received by Demaloche Rinpoche, and that's the explanation I received, so that makes a lot of sense to me. But of course it's something debatable, and in the end, maybe some people can and some can't. Who knows? Yes?
Well, in the Pali tradition, the Theravada tradition, they say that if you're using the breath as your object, then after a certain point, you have they call it a nimitta. Have you heard of that?
No, unless if you use the English word. Is there an English word for it?
A sign. I think the Tibetan term is tsenma or something.
Senma?
Sen. So it's actually a
Sen.
kind of mental image of the breath. So that just appears kind of on its own, and then you switch to that, and you're no longer having a body consciousness of the breath.
That you need. That would be the case of where you no longer observe, but rather just remember basically that first time where you've observed, and then from that onwards, you just remember that same. So you no longer require actually... You see, in the sense, the reason the breathing is so helpful, because we can go back to something that can be observed. So initially that is very helpful, because there's something else in between.
It's actually something that appears to your mind, like it could appear as a light or as a star. It's some kind of image that just appears spontaneously in your mind, and then that's what you use as your object.
Well, first of all, when you say image, in the Sanskrit tradition, they would talk about the meaning generality. So every conceptual mind, every moment of mindfulness has such a image anyway. But now the question is it like breathing, body consciousness perceiving breathing, mindfulness aware of breathing? Then, again, body consciousness perceiving breathing, mindfulness of breathing. Mental consciousness, is it like that? Or, and that's now what you're talking about, so you have a mental image in those each moments anyway. The moment you have mindfulness, there's a mental image. But now, the tactile, the body consciousness no longer realizes its object, because now the mental consciousness totally takes over. And the mental image that appeared in between all the time now appears continuously, without needing the input of the body consciousness. That would be the second case. So that would be a time where the mental image is the same from moment to moment, and that is the result of your memory. It's basically based on memory. So that was your question. Are you basing it on memory? Yes, with these intervals, it's also a type of memory that doesn't go back a long time ago, because it was just a moment earlier. The body consciousness perceived the breathing, and then mindfulness is aware. In the second case that you're mentioning here, is that the last time the breathing was registered, that was realized, lies a long time, whenever was the last time you were in mindful, and then the mindfulness just takes over, and you have that mental image continuously, moment from moment to moment, without needing the body consciousness to realize its object. Yeah, that means that's not specifically explained in the texts, but that's implied, because if you can do it with the Buddha's body. When you do the meditation where you don't focus on the breathing, but you concentrate on the body of a Buddha. Initially, you need an eye consciousness to perceive the shape and color. So you look at this image for long enough, and then when it's clear enough, then your mindfulness takes over, and for however long you can, you concentrate on just that. And every now and then you may feel, no, I need to have a look at it again, right? And you look again and again. Right? You concentrate, and at some point your concentration is so strong, you no longer need to look at the eye consciousness, you just have that continuous mental image of the Buddha. Does that make sense? So I think there are those two scenarios, and in the Tibetan tradition I haven't come across it being explained that way, which doesn't mean it's not there, but it totally makes sense logically.
I think usually Tibetans don't use the breath to develop.
Yeah, not really.
I don't have that experience.
Well, Geshe Kelsang, who reads the sutras very extensively, he talks about it a lot. So my guess is he's read about it. He's very aware that it is part of the Mahayana Sutras. But I agree, he probably doesn't, well, I don't know, I never ask him what he uses. He certainly speaks about it, and not because Westerners talk about it or people from the Thai tradition, but he's found it in the Mahayana Sutras. But I agree, because in the beginning you're told, well, breathing is one option. Usually you're told about it's an option, but better is, and then everyone chooses the Buddha image in the end. Yeah. It's us Westerners who choose the breathing more, right? Okay. All right, you had a question.
You spoke earlier about the danger of falling into nihilism
Mm-hmm.
when you realize that things are empty of inherent existence, right?
Almost, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was wondering, I mean, in day-to-day life, when we use what we learn about emptiness and about the nature of reality,
Yeah.
so it kind of makes space in the way we perceive things. But obviously, we don't, interact with people while we are experiencing emptiness. Then we would have trouble interacting.
Yes.
So I was wondering regarding how things do exist. I mean, do we learn about the way things do exist only as a personal experience during meditation, or is there an actual? I'm not sure.
No. I think I understand what you mean. Well, when I first hesitated a little bit, her question was, you say you fall into the extreme of nihilism when you realize emptiness. No. When you realize emptiness, you no longer fall into the extreme of nihilism. But during the process of trying to realize emptiness, there is a danger of falling to the extreme of nihilism. That's why I hesitated a little bit. So yes, I agree. Once you start thinking about, reflecting upon how phenomena exist, don't exist, engage in ultimate analysis, you start losing the object, and you may come to the conclusion there's actually no table and there's no person. Okay? Now, your question is, well, when you go through the reason, of course, when on a daily basis, if you remember emptiness, you can't do that all the time, because if you meditate on emptiness for too long while driving a car, you're likely to have an accident. You still need to watch the road, and if your mental consciousness is too preoccupied with emptiness, it's potentially dangerous. So no, you can take a moment or so, or a few moments, to think about it, but you cannot continuously think about it. Yeah, so I agree to that. I agree with that, but then the next question is, you're saying, are there means and methods to understanding how phenomena do exist in order not to fall into extreme of nihilism? Is that your question? Of course there are. Of course there are. Yes, because otherwise, if there weren't, well, what would we do to get out of, out of that extreme of falling into extreme of nihilism? Now, let me say one thing, something very interesting that I notice again and again. Just very recently, there's an Indian man, Raj. If you're from Dharamsala, you know Raj. He's amazing. He's like 86 years old, speaks about 7 languages, taught himself Tibetan just recently, as people do, and so he knows Sanskrit really well. And he's going with me through the Pramanavartika, the text I'm translating from. He checks the Sanskrit, and since he now knows Tibetan, he's checking the Tibetan, how close it is, right? Anyway, so he speaks some Greek too, I think. But anyway, so he's this really humble. He looks like a coolie. If you see him, he wears rubber shoes, and he's very humble, and he's so into the Dharma. But he's still a Hindu at heart, and he's very helpful with the translation work, etc. So Raj is a classical case. Raj is not interested in emptiness. He's only interested in how phenomena do exist. So he's like, okay, they're empty, all right. Now he's trying to understand how they do exist. And he struggles like hell. Why? Because his inherent sense of how phenomena exist inherently, he now tries to understand how they exist conventionally. And of course, there's a huge clash. Anyway, so this is a whole story, but I don't just notice it in him, I notice it with other people too, wanting to know how things exist before you analyze emptiness. Because then there's all this contradiction, because we talk about phenomena being interdependent as a means to overcoming the sense that nothing exists. And then if you haven't denied how phenomena cannot exist, if you haven't denied inherent existence, and you're trying to take inherently existent phenomena and try to understand them as being independently existent, you face this contradiction. There's a sense that our mind creates everything. There's a sense when we walk into the room, when we're out of the room, if our mind is no longer there, then the things go out of existence. That's a typical question where you try to understand how phenomena exist without having denied inherent existence. That's his whole thing. He's down with these pages, he writes down very tiny pieces of loose paper, and they're all about this. Until very recently we discussed it, and finally I think he had a sense that he should first focus on emptiness. His whole question is, well, if everything is dependent on the mind, and if I stop thinking about the table, does the table go out of existence? That is such a typical question where, I'm just saying that because it arises so frequently, that people have difficulty in positing how phenomena really exist because they take something inherently existent and try now to understand how it merely exists in dependence on the mind. Well, if it exists inherently, you don't need the mind. Why do you try to explain how it depends on the mind? Okay? So, that was just nothing to do with your question, but I wanted to say that anyway. So, therefore, it is encouraged to first focus on emptiness. First focus on emptiness. Start analyzing. The first step is to identify how do phenomena appear to me. Because if we don't do that, this whole exercise seems just to be like some empty exercise, semantics, right? So it just seems to be just a word game. So first, recognize how things appear to us. And then check, does it exist in that way or not? And when you come to the conclusion, well, I cannot find it. Is it this? Is it that? And I never find anything there. Well, it can't exist, therefore. Then, that would be a case where you go, so it doesn't exist at all. It can't exist. And then that would be an example of where you fall into extreme. And don't worry, it's not like, oh my God, I've fallen into extreme of nihilism. I'm doomed. It doesn't happen for very long. All you need to go is pinch yourself and you're back. But it's just that moment, when your mind is analyzing, it can't exist. And then you go, oh no, but it does because it's dependently arisen. And you go back. And then you go, oh, since it's dependently arisen, it must really exist. So then you go again. So it's like this balancing act between back and forth in order to eventually find the middle. So yeah, in answer to your question, you see, for us, existent and truly existent are the same. What are you talking about? Truly existent? That means existent. So if you deny truly existent, you're denying existent because they're the same. To us, we don't even know initially, what are you talking about, truly existent? What does that mean? Inherently existent, truly existent? No sense of what we're denying here. So because we don't differentiate, then we think we deny the whole thing. It's not there. So very natural. And in order for that not to happen, there are all these explanations that phenomena do exist in dependence. Right? And so initially those seem to be contradictory. Depends, but lacking inherent existence. So it's very hard. So Geshe Kelsang Wangmo, what he stresses, he taught 1 year, gave beautiful teaching for 1 month on emptiness. On this book he wrote himself on emptiness. And then he used certain parts of it and he taught it for 1 month. It's beautiful. There's a translation available. Or if you know Tibetan, you can listen to that. It's widely available. And in this teaching, he said, it's not enough to understand that an object cannot be found. Don't think you realize emptiness. Don't think you realize emptiness just not finding the table. No, it is once you understand the table cannot be found, but it exists inherently, being able to bring those two together, if then you focus again, after you have reached this understanding that nonetheless it exists inherently, it exists independently. So first you don't find it, then you shift your focus and understand that it exists interdependently, or dependently. And when you go back again to understanding that it cannot be found, that's when you got the emptiness, because then you've understood both aspects. Right? So he explained it that way. So basically to understand emptiness truly, and not just the non-findability, that in itself does not qualify to be called. So therefore it needs to have a method. You need to have a method that explains to you how to get out of that extreme of nihilism, because otherwise how could you understand emptiness? Both need to be understood, how the thing does not exist and how it does exist. And then when you focus on thereafter, once you've understood both with different types of minds that arise alternately, then the next time you realize lack of inherent existence, so basically for the second time the non-findability, only then do you have the full understanding of emptiness in that moment. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes?
Second one is completely different. It's maybe a anthropological question. Do people that grow up in Buddhist countries
No, I'm not sure. Okay, first of all, in answer to your first question, calm abiding is just the name given to a particular type of concentration that does not arise naturally, but that is trained, that is the result of meditation, prolonged meditation, which enables you to remain focused with stability and clarity on the same object for at least 4 hours. So in other words, if you now sit down, you meditate, you train yourself in concentration, and after, let's say 6 months, let's say you can do it in 6 months, So in 6 months, if after 6 months you sit down, you stop the time, you set an alarm. You need to set an alarm because otherwise you'll be so focused. So set an alarm. So after 4 hours, when the alarm goes off and you rise, and you know for sure, oh my God, for 4 hours I stuck to the same thing without interruption. Then you know, oh, now you have calm abiding. Okay, first question, first answer. Second answer, whether I believe that people in Buddhist countries, or whether I think people in Buddhist countries have a different understanding of the self. It depends. I mean, if you look, I don't know enough about Thais or Burmese people or people in other Buddhist countries other than Tibetans. And even with Tibetans, I'm only exposed to a very few number of Tibetans who live in Dharamsala or in Drepung or, the places they have visited. But my general understanding is not that they have a better sense of a self. I don't think that. I don't think it's like you explain a Tibetan lack of self or selflessness and they go, oh yeah, right. Whereas we Westerners take a little longer. Not necessarily. Wait, yes. So, but what you find in Tibetan culture is, for instance, how can I put it? Let's put it that way. When I first came into Tibetan culture, when I first started living with Tibetans, my teacher called me an emotional yo-yo. Whereas I thought all Tibetans are like stones, no emotions. And I was like, what's going on? These people are weird, have no emotions. My way is the right way, but their way is weird. So actually, I was just an emotional yo-yo in the sense that something great happened, and I was like, wow! Like, oh my God! Whoa! And my teacher was like, wow, okay, calm down, right? Or something terrible happened. I'm like, oh, poor me, right? So it took me a while to understand that my reaction was extreme, and that the Tibetan reaction, when I asked them, well, why are you not upset? They were like, well, it's impermanent. It's changing. Something terrible happens, but it's terrible for a moment and then it's already changing. So why are you so upset? So my reaction was very much that of a sense something horrible happens. It's horrible. It's still horrible. It continues to be horrible, right? Just holding on to permanence. Whereas with my classmates, that's easy to understand. It doesn't last. You don't need to give a whole class on the fact that things don't last. So most of them are in touch with that. At least the people I had contact with. So that was reflected in their emotional response to things. They were just more resilient in the sense, or more, they reacted more like, oh great, okay, let's move on. Right? Something wonderful, all right, it's already changing. So let's move on. Something else is arising. So enjoy. Okay, move on. So it wasn't this like up and down that I experienced. So, and I noticed this with Tibetans in general, right? And they may not give you that explanation of like, oh, well, it's impermanent. They may not know that, but they watch. They learn by watching their parents, etc., and take that on. Right? So that I've noticed. And of course, there's so much emphasis on not being selfish. So it's part of the culture. There's a school near Dharamsala, and then you get into the school. When you arrive there, there's a huge sports what do you call that? Like a sporting ground, like a football ground. And just behind it, there's a building, and it says others before self. Others before self. You know, people come there, what? Others before self? So that's like the first thing when you get to the school. So it's basically children, they see it all day long. Others before self, others before self. So it's very much part of their culture. Put others before yourself. That's a quality. Whereas in the West, make sure you're better in class. You know, your parents may tell you, make sure you're better. It's kind of like it's implied, if not explicitly expressed. So our culture may actually foster a sense of selfishness to a certain degree. Whereas Tibetan culture doesn't. Well, of course, it's changing now, but it does. The culture has very much become, the religion has become very much part of their culture, which is expressed in their behavior, although they're not aware of it. And so my guess is, if you're less selfish, it's easier to understand selflessness, because you have less of an obstacle that it's like, I need to be selfish, otherwise who's going to look after me? If you're already very happy being selfless, it's easier to let go, right? But I'm not trying to say that every Tibetan is like the Dalai Lama. No, that would be naive. I mean, I've met Tibetans who are not very nice, but it's rare. It's not as other societies, you find more people who are more selfish than you find in Tibetan societies. But do they exist? Of course they do. Yeah. But I learned so much from my classmates. I always say that. I learned something really interesting. Okay, this is not your question. But, when you see people practice it, then it's no longer theory. In the West, we're so competitive. Right? We're so competitive. And my classmates were notoriously non-competitive. They're so non-competitive in schools that they founded the system now of making the students more competitive. So you take your exams, and it's very clear. Number 1, 2, and 3. Who is best, second best, and third best. And then they make an announcement. For weeks it's outside. Right? And then when there's the celebration, when you get your degree, it's outside, and then everyone gets up for number 3 and claps like this. Right? Kind of moderately. And then number 2 gets up, and everyone goes a little harder. And number 1 gets up, and everyone goes, whoa! To get the competitiveness going. Whereas when I teach Emory, I used to teach the students from a university, Emory University, so when I gave them back their result, I had to put it on a tiny piece of paper that only they could read and not the person next to them. Because, oh my God, if someone knew they did better, right? And I remember once, they all wrote papers, and their papers were all really good. There were A's and A minuses. And I had a teaching assistant, like a TA, and so we had sat together, given the degrees, we were both very pleased, and so I saw them looking at their little pieces of paper, happy, so everyone was very happy, and then I said, I'm so pleased, all of you did so well. The worst grade was an A minus, and the TA was like, no, don't, too late. So you could see the A minuses went like, oh. And then sure enough, after class, the A minuses got up and said, I didn't do very well. What can I do to improve? Because it wasn't about the A minus, it was about, did they do better than everyone else? And I was like, oh my God, what a difference. Because my classmates, they would always rejoice in everyone else doing well. They'd be rejoicing. And so if they didn't have the diligence to go on for whatever other reason, they could be a little bit lazy. That was a disadvantage, right? There was no driving force of like being good because everyone else is, or because you want to be better than everyone else. And if you weren't replacing it with love and compassion, which some did, then there's a danger of being lazy. And since they couldn't find a way of getting them becoming more loving and compassionate, they tried that. They tried the competitive way of doing it. So and also like Indian kids are trained a little differently. I mean, being a huge country and competitiveness is what makes things work. So in the Tibetan schools, the Indian kids do best. Right? And the Tibetan kids just rejoice. So, okay, so it has its disadvantages, of course, if you don't replace it with something else. But the point I'm trying to make is they were so much happier because someone else's success, how wonderful, how good for them. I'm so happy for that person, right? So nice. And sometimes it would go like, oh, I want to be like that. How wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I also try the same. So it actually fostered a healthy type of competitiveness, which is not really competitiveness as such. It was not jealousy, at least. So beautiful. I learned so much. Why be jealous? It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense because the moment we're jealous, we're unhappy. Secondly, we cannot work harder. We're not successful. So the one thing we don't get, we move further away from it. So it doesn't make sense. So if you watch your classmates, how happy they are, it's like you try it and it feels good. It actually feels good. So you do it a little more, do it a little more. And your life just becomes happier. There's much more happiness because there's so much to be happy about, so much to rejoice about. And in the end, it doesn't make me worse or better. If someone is better than me, who cares? I'm still the same. And if I rejoice, I create the causes to become like that. So another reason to rejoice. Whereas if I don't rejoice, if I'm jealous, what do? I'm angry. So it's a mixture between attachment. I'm attached to that success, but I'm resentful towards that person having that success. So it's attachment towards this one thing that I want to have, but resentment with regard to the other person having it. So that aspect of resentment, therefore, is negative. I don't want them to have it, and that becomes a cause for me not having it. Well, great, thanks very much. That's the thing I want. Right? So from the point of view of karma, from the point of view of being happy, so many reasons, and still we're so used to it in the West. So this is something, I think, in the West, a lot of advantages of growing up in the West, of course. A lot of advantages, but that is one part that I think is very painful. Very painful. Painful to the degree that if my best friend does better than me, I cannot rejoice in my own success. That's my best friend. I love them. Right? Fortunately, I don't think in the West it goes to the degree that mothers are jealous of their children. So they can still rejoice in their success. But sometimes maybe they are. Right? Maybe they are. Yes. Good question. Can it be learned? Anything. Thanks to neuroplasticity. I'm not saying I learned it. But I tried it and it made me feel better. And in certain occasions, I can do it better. But also, Lama Zopa Rinpoche once did a really beautiful meditation in Tushita, which, I used to think, well, how do you do it? You need to do all this reasoning first. You can't just go rejoice and then you rejoice. That's what I thought. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche taught me differently. One day I was at Tushita. Rinpoche gave it was actually a puja, but it ended up being much more of a long teaching and a little bit of puja. So Rinpoche at some point said, let's now all sit down and rejoice. And as a nun, I was more towards the front row, so people were behind me. And so Rinpoche said, rejoice in your own merit, rejoice in everyone else's. He didn't say rejoice because, he just said do it, right? And I was like, and I tried it for some time and it worked. And I was thinking, I wonder whether I'm just kind of doing it wrong and I think it works. What about everyone else? So I turned around and there was everyone. We're just sitting there very happily. So I realized, oh my God, you can actually just, someone's success, you fake it. It's almost like you go and you feel happy. It's like saying, like psychologically, you just force yourself, how nice, right? And the moment you think, how nice, a feeling will arise. I mean, they say just smiling will make you happier. So if you just tell yourself, how nice for them, jealousy, shut up. How nice for you. How nice for you. So you just form a new habit. It actually works. Well, Lama Zopa Rinpoche proved it because we were all rejoicing. I think it was half an hour. Right? Be happy about this. Be happy about that person. Be happy about a Buddha. Oh, that's easy. Buddhas. Okay, but be happy about the person you don't like. His or her practice going really well, right? And once you're in that joy mode, you can include anyone, right? It's all colored already by that joy. So you start off with someone that you sincerely wish, that you sincerely are happy about, maybe your own children. And once that joy has arisen, you take the person you're jealous of. And you feel, may they have more of that. That what you don't want. May they have a bigger car. May their house be twice as big. May their children do twice as, and then you actually feel it and you go, yeah, that's all right. I can bear it. I'm still here. I didn't die. Right? And you start enjoying it and you do more of it. It's so important, I think. Jealousy really sucks. This is one of my favorite jokes that Rubina Curtin ever made. I pretend it's my joke. It's not mine, it's hers. She says, jealousy really makes us feel so bad. No one says, I had a terrible day. I had a great day yesterday. I was jealous all day long. I love that joke. No one says I had a great day because I was jealous from morning to evening. Right? The moment it arises, it's painful. We can have a certain degree of happiness with attachment, even a certain degree of satisfaction when we're angry. Right? It's not a calm satisfaction, but you beat the guy up and there's a moment of satisfaction possibly. But jealousy, not a moment of happiness. When we're jealous, there's not a moment of happiness. So why do we do it? Okay? So I think this is one thing I saw my classmates doing and I was like, are they kidding me? I know this guy really wants it. How can you rejoice in it? And so that really gave me that confidence that it's possible, at least, if nothing else. All right. We should do some rejoicing, actually, just seeing. Okay, not now, but if we have time, we'll do some rejoicing. Okay, what else? Yes?
In the discussion group, we had a question that is attached to attachment. Why do we sit in the same place in retreat?
Okay, why do we sit in the same spot in retreat? Why we do not switch around? It depends where you sit. I'm okay. Okay, no. I know. I realize that. I'm just kidding. No, I understand that. Okay. Well, there is a bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a bit of a tendency to stay in the same place in a retreat, for instance, because there's also something about the energy that is created around being in a particular place, being with certain people. So in a strict retreat, you try to be in the same place because there's some energy that is created. I mean, like, for instance, to give you another example, if you're in retreat and suddenly the people around you don't show up, it actually affects you. It actually affects you. So it's almost your mind becomes more subtle, more sensitive to certain things around you, and you settle more comfortably into the same seat. You're used to this. You're busy enough that's just focusing on your meditation, so you try to keep the same environment, okay? Because it holds some kind of energy. Am I right about this? Do you?
I mean, there's some retreats, like
Yeah.
if you're doing a bunch of self-retreat or another month retreat, you're supposed to do it on the same seat all the time. But
Exactly.
that's not true for all retreats.
No, that's not true for all retreats.
There is something about
Yeah.
being in the same place.
Yeah, yeah. So Venerable Sanghya is saying, for instance, there are certain retreat, in particular tantric retreats such as Vajrasattva, where you're supposed to stay in the same place. You're supposed to do each session in the same spot. You don't remove the seat. You don't even move it, the same cushion, to a different spot. You're supposed to be in the same spot. And that's not true for every retreat. I'm just saying there is that tendency. So therefore, this is also reflected by His Holiness's teachings. You know, when His Holiness gives a teaching, most people stay in the same place. Just because you're of a spot, you got used to it, and now once you're used to it, you're not so much distracted and you can focus on the teachings more. But that's not the only reason. That's like something you notice. But it can also be out of attachment. Oh, I want this comfortable seat. I can't let go of it. So I guess in the end, as a group, you could decide, let's switch around. Those who, have a seat more towards the back and want to sit in the front, or want a wall seat, so let's give others the opportunity. Let's suffer through one session and someone else. So maybe those who sit against the wall could say, I'll be happy tomorrow to switch with someone, or maybe just sit somewhere else tomorrow. But that should be a group decision, or at least those who have a better seat could make their seats available. So, but I'm trying to say, really, it's just a custom. It's something that is usually done. You do sit in the same spot. I think we have this tendency also as a family. We sit in the same spot. We at least did at home. My dad, same spot. My sister, me, my mom. So it was always the same spot. So we just have that tendency.
I did an experiment once with my family.
Yes.
I asked them to move Friday night.
Yes.
One seat.
Uh-huh.
And it crashed after 2 weeks.
No one wanted to do it. Okay. There you go. There is just something, we settle into something and it makes us feel comfortable. But we need to check, is it out of attachment? Right? And if we find, of course, we are a group here. This is all a group effort. We depend on one another. We talk about love and compassion. So if there's someone who says, want my seat, I'd be happy to sit somewhere else. Honestly, it doesn't really make a difference. And I'm sure other people feel the same way. Unless you're really in so much pain and more pain than anyone else, that's different. But that would be a suggestion. Yeah, why not? But that should possibly, next time you should suggest it at the beginning. Now you're aware of that, maybe say in the beginning, look, there was this retreat, this happened, and would it be a possibility, would someone be willing to switch seats possibly? Yeah? Yeah. All right. Yes, please. Jonathan? Yeah?
Doesn't the pursuit of happiness set up expectations that will inevitably be frustrated, especially long-term happiness, because we can't be happy all the time if that's what we expect. Or that feeling not happy is wrong, like feeling that some emotions are bad.
Okay.
It's the purpose.
Okay, so 2 questions here. I detect 2 questions. The first question, isn't that unrealistic to expect to always be happy? Because from our own experience, we know we can't be always happy. First question. Second question, aren't we therefore becoming attached to this and no longer see the good things in suffering, for instance, or learn from our own suffering, etc.? Isn't there also an advantage or some advantage to suffering? That's basically what you're asking, right? Is it?
It's not an advantage in negative emotion, but maybe the expectation that it won't come or that it shouldn't come can be self-defeating.
So if it doesn't come, we get unhappy just because it doesn't arise, right?
No, I meant that if we think about anger, for example, as a bad emotion that we shouldn't be having, that can just reinforce anger when it comes.
We get angry with ourselves because of being angry. Great. Being angry with the other guy, being angry with myself. Yeah, okay. Very, very good point. Very good point. Well, first of all, the first part, can we be happy all the time? Well, the Buddha says yes. So lasting happiness is possible. How can I prove it? Very difficult to prove if I have no experience of it. So now my question would be, can I lengthen the time I'm happy? Right? And also something even further, even better than that. I remember Jitsunma Tenzin Pamo, she once gave a teaching or a question and answer session, and in that session she said that scientists have found that with certain practices, such as mindfulness, our general level of happiness is raised. And what she described, and I'm sure many of you recognize it, I've only heard Jitsumu talk about it, so I'm just repeating what she's saying, but whenever I talk about what she said, other people go, yes, yes, and they recognize what I'm saying. So there's a certain degree of contentment and satisfaction all of us have. There's a usual, like a thread that goes through our lives of a certain level of contentment and happiness. And every now and then it goes down and it comes back up again. So a certain suffering and it goes back again. And then we're really happy, but that goes back again. So it's just every now and then there's like a spike upwards or downwards. But pretty quickly after that spike, we go back to the usual happiness, right? And I think that's totally true. A disaster strikes. How long can you be really unhappy about it? You know, you bounce back. Or something great, wonderful happens, you win the lottery, but eventually it comes down again, it becomes normal. But they say that through spiritual practice, the general degree becomes higher. So forgetting about these spikes, the general sense of well-being is raised. Now, how do I find out? Well, I do it and see whether it's true. From my own experience, it's totally true. Ask me 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what was the degree of happiness and contentment? It has been raised. So I know for sure from my own experience, I'm a happier person. My mom says I'm a better person. She's not a Buddhist, but she thinks I'm nicer. That's different. So it's a little bit nicer. You know, I used to fight with my mom a lot as a teenager. Whoa, you know, that's gone down. So, but that's a different matter altogether. But about happiness, I seriously feel more happy. Things that make me more unhappy, that used to make me more unhappy, this going down and bouncing back, I bounce back quicker, right? And going up, yes, but it's not that like I want it to stay, you know, it's there and it goes down and it's fine, but my general level of well-being has definitely been raised. So that fact gives me confidence that it can go better, So I believe that now through my little experience that I can reach a higher and higher level which I will not fall down from. That no matter what happens. And I've watched, look, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, disaster struck. He's the same. He's always happy. So we can even watch other people who no matter what happens to them, that level of equanimity or that level of peace and content and happiness is not affected at all. That's what we mean with lasting happiness. That we're no longer affected by external happenings, but rather we're happy no matter what, because we've found this internal happiness. So that's an answer to your first question. But that you can only find out yourself. Don't listen to what anyone tells you. Check, and it takes some time, whether by doing the practices you've learned about or you will learn about in the future, when you apply them, does your level of happiness is raised. And then if you do, slowly you get a sense, well, it can be further raised, it can be further. You understand that I'm actually just unhappy when afflictions arise, but I know my afflictions can be lessened, etc. So this gives you the confidence that this is possible. I can't say much more about that. Secondly, isn't there the danger I get angry with anger? Yes, definitely. There's always a danger that when I don't do things right, and this is actually a matter of not doing it in the proper way. I'm not, when I say I want to reduce my anger, I'm not replacing my anger with other people with anger at myself or anger with my own anger. I'm not replacing anger here really, I'm just replacing the object. I'm trying to reduce anger per se, directed at others, directed at myself, right? Directed at anything, that sense of exaggerating the negativity, that sense of frustration, that I just want to reduce that in general, okay? So I'm not going, don't be angry, don't be angry, don't be... that's just suppressing it, making the anger stronger. But just understanding, it harms me. It harms others. It's not a solution to a problem. Go through the list, go through the list of the things that are positive about patience versus the negativities of anger. It's a little bit like, if I really want to eat a hamburger, I want to eat a hamburger, I want to eat a hamburger, I want to eat a hamburger. Don't eat a hamburger, don't eat a hamburger. One day I'm going to explode. I'm just going to sneak into that McDonald's, buy 5, and just, overeat. Okay? And feel sick the next day, right? So here it's about hamburger. Okay, I love hamburgers. They're really good. In fact, it smelled really good of hamburger when they came out of my room. Or some fried meat. Anyway, so, nice, right? But when I start thinking about, if I start thinking about the taste, as I go, it's already getting water in my mouth. So when I do that, my desire for hamburger rises, right? I'm a hopeless vegetarian. I really still crave meat after so many years. Okay, anyway, so, as you can tell. So, therefore, with regard to food such as hamburgers, so the way to reduce your appetite is think about the disadvantages. Every time I eat a hamburger, I put preservative E 95 into myself, preservative E 55, just all these E's, they're scary enough, right? And then they cause cancer and they do this. And after some time, I'm like, I don't want to eat the hamburger. I enjoy the moment it's in my mouth, but that's just a few seconds and I swallow it and I'm full of all that poison. So then I can actually easily let go. I don't want it. I feel like, oh no, that's disgusting. That's like someone spitting in my hamburger and then I have to eat it. It feels a bit like that, right? So I no longer crave it. So similar with anger. With anger, it's like not repressing it, not getting angry with my own anger, but understanding it really harms me. It does not solve the problem. It is short-term energy there, but that makes me very tired afterwards. All the list we went through, I don't need to go through a list again, that in the end, I let go of it naturally. I just don't want it, right? It's like spitting in my hamburger, don't want it. Or like, don't want that anger, don't want it. So next time, when it arises, no, don't want that one. No, thank you very much. I'll try patience this time and see how it works. So I make a conscious choice. I'm not repressing. It's here based on an understanding. It's an understanding. So wisdom is very important. That's why we do all this analysis. Not to force you. Don't be angry. Buddha said so. Have faith. Just do it. It's not going to work. Okay?
But observing with compassion is not helping.
Pardon?
I'm saying observing the anger and treat myself with compassion.
Oh, that of course also helps. Of course this helps. Those are all means and methods, but why would you have compassion in the first place? First you need to develop compassion. It doesn't just arise naturally, right? If you have self-hatred, don't expect compassion just to pop up directed at yourself. We're so used to self-hatred. So, first of all, we need as a countermeasure to our self-hatred. I mean, if I'm hateful of myself getting angry, then that's definitely, a kind of a case of that. So I need to learn to love myself and accept myself. And that can only happen if it makes sense to me. It doesn't arise naturally. Okay? Or if it does, great, but then I don't have self-hatred anyway. So if it doesn't, I need to find reasons for why and so develop it that way. Yeah. Sorry, Ranit, you had a...
Continuing Jonathan, even though we're training and practicing, we are falling. I'm falling. You have all the time. You get angry, and then I'm not angry at myself, but I feel a lot of guilt.
Guilt.
Yeah. It's so easy to say don't angry about yourself, but what about the guilt?
Yeah. I forgot about the guilt. That's right, because that's big in the Judeo-Christian background. The guilt, right. Yes. What is guilt? Let's first all recognize guilt. What is guilt? Last year, I gave a lot of talks about afflictive emotions. And the conclusion I came to with regard to our afflictive emotions, they're all exaggerated versions of emotions that are helpful. Any afflictive emotion has a counterpart that actually makes sense. Have you ever noticed? So attachment, the counterpart that makes sense is love. Right? Feeling close to someone. Just a sense. But if it's like, I can't live without that person being close to me, then that's attachment. What else? Anger. Right? Anger is like, I disapprove. the person has done such and such. That is not okay. I need to do something about it. So just recognizing the negativity of something and generating the wish to do something about it. That's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. Injustice, there's injustice taking place, recognizing it for what it is. Okay, anyway, so what about guilt? What is the emotion that is helpful, that is a counterpart, that is not the exaggerated version of guilt? Regret. Regret. Okay, I made a mistake. That was wrong. Let's move on. Instead of, oh, I'm so bad. Oh, bad me. It's like totally exaggerating, right? That's what guilt is, right? I'm so terrible. I got angry this morning. I'm a Buddhist practitioner. I should be better than everyone else because I'm a more important practitioner. No, I'm just telling you my version of guilt. Right? It's just this exaggeration that sneaks in. So really we need to recognize it, because the moment it kind of, it's a self, that the exaggeration of the I sneaks in. Right? So when we have anger, we exaggerate, that negative. With attachment, it's all this exaggeration. So there's nothing wrong with regret. In fact, regret is very important. Well, don't regret being generous, because then the money is gone and the virtue. So that's not a kind of regret you want to generate. No, but regret for something negative. So that's something that reduces the force of the negativity. Something very good. But then we start exaggerating it and it goes into guilt. And that's just another negative emotion that, especially in the West, we deal with. Tibetans don't really have a word for that. But that doesn't mean they don't have guilt. But I don't believe to the same degree that we have guilt. It's just not part of their culture as much as it is part of the Judeo-Christian culture, I would say. Yeah. Where does it come up in Judaism? From the mother. Oh, my mother's like that. My mother has this saying. Once Fred said, my mom is like a Polish mother, he said. Because what my mom used to say when we were children, when you're little, you kick me in the belly. When you grow older, you kick me in the heart. My mom would always say that. She's always on that, like, the things I did for you. I did so much for you. My mom does that. She loves doing it. And it's fine now. I got used to it. But, it was just part of, she would say that. But it's not just that. It's not just the mother. I think it's part of our culture, I guess, too, this feeling of guilt. And I'm curious about finding the origin of our Judeo-Christian culture. I wonder about Islam. Is there a problem with guilt in Islam? In Islamic countries? Or Islamic cultures? Yes, is there?
It's a whole business around shame. Shame of the body, shame of, especially women bears. They are guilty for everything that happens.
So guilt in terms of if they're being abused, then that's their fault. They should feel, okay.
It's their fault if a man is attracted to them. So they have to cover themselves. It's their fault anyhow, whatever happened.
Well, that exists in our culture too, right? The victims feeling they're to blame when they're being sexually abused. I guess that's also part of our culture. Anyway, yes, please.
I think it's the whole idea of a God who creates us
Mm-hmm.
and made laws that we are supposed to obey.
Mm.
If we don't obey the laws, then this whole idea of God
Punishing us? Interesting.
that's my analysis.
That's an interesting idea. So that it may come from, and it's not saying that those who created the Judeo-Christian religion or who came up with it actually produced it, but that may just be a psychological reaction to a God who's almighty and who's fair and everything and does everything for us. And there we are, we act negatively, we're then being punished, etc. Yeah.
And our parents got it and do the same for us. We created you, so you owe us, and we feel guilty for it.
Yes, go ahead. Pardon? Say again. exalted in exiled. Ah. But just being punished. But look, I mean, even the law of karma, I mean, even the law of gravity, you know, I drop this and my cup is broken. So there are negative consequences to my action. I don't think that, and whether you call it punishment or not, but there are negative consequences to my actions. I don't think that necessarily leads to guilt. It's an exaggerate.
It's a natural law. It's a natural
It's something that we naturally.
I think that God made law. God makes the laws, he also punishes us if we don't keep it. I think that personal aspect of it.
Right, okay. So that personal aspect of God has done so much for us, and so how here we are and kind of repaying God in such a way. So, yes, so I it's very interesting. So there's definitely a part of that, the whole aspect of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, the idea of one almighty God and us never being able to live up to what we're supposed to do. But it's definitely something interesting. I like to analyze it just because it helps us understanding the cause better, helps us, of course, to work against it to a more effective degree, because it's terrible. Guilt, I never realized how strongly it is ingrained. And of course, I felt guilty for the longest time. But then if you're around Tibetans all the time who notoriously don't feel guilty, it kind of falls away a little bit. And you keep forgetting, but I definitely remember the times when I felt terribly guilty, and it's a terrible, terrible state of mind that really paralyzes you and makes you very unhappy. Let's just a second, Eris. Do you want to? Do you want it to make the last one? Oh, sorry, you kept raising your hand. I'm sorry, Eris, and both of you. Yes, you're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jonathan. Actually, like to a very strong concept, I guess, in Buddhism, which is you need to have a direct understanding in order to pursue practicing or in order to be a Buddhist. And I don't really get it with the idea of karma because, as I understand, only the Buddha can understand the karmatic law and us.
Okay. Yep. I get what you say. Okay. Actually, from a Buddhist point of view... Oh, what was the question? Sorry. Her question is, it relates to Jonathan's question in the sense, I guess also to the answer that I gave, that I said, well, you need to look at it, you need to look at some of the ideas and then gain a first-hand experience, because if you don't, you're never really able to move on, basically, right? So, and her question is, well, how could we do that with regard to karma? Because it's only a Buddha who knows karma. I don't think there is a contradiction. Eventually, we have to have direct experience of everything. And if that means you have it when you're Buddha, well, that's okay. If it's only then. So no one is saying that before we become a Buddha, we have to have experience of everything. And then all that is left is become a Buddha. That wouldn't work. There's certain things, actually we distinguish between phenomena being obvious, those things that are obvious or manifest, and then those things that are slightly hidden, and those things that are very hidden. From our perspective, relative to our mind, there are these things. So karma, the subtle working of karma, is an example of something that is very hidden. So by definition, you can really just understand it fully once you're a Buddha. But you don't need to understand it in order to become a Buddha. So it's basically just the result. Once you're a Buddha, that's when you understand it. In fact, you need to understand it to be most effective to help other sentient beings. So basically, whether you say being omniscient is my goal, or understanding everyone's karma, understanding what people need, what their karma is, what their aspiration is, that's just a different way of putting it. So that's the goal. But to get there, we only need to know some of the slightly hidden things. Right? Some. I'm not saying everything's slightly hidden. We don't need to know everything. But the slightly hidden things such as emptiness, impermanence, the subtle, the suffering nature of phenomena, the things we learn about usually, they're only slightly hidden, right? So these we need to understand, and without direct experience, we won't be able to move step by step closer towards enlightenment. And then there are other things, you could say they're part of the slightly hidden category, but not that difficult. But it's basically not as difficult as emptiness, but still hard. And it's only through reflecting on them over and over until we have some experience, then it's become effective enough so that our mind can transform. But it's not that hard. So really what we need to understand is only certain objects that are part of the category of slightly hidden. Extremely hidden by definition, it's extremely hidden because only Buddha can fully understand it. Of course, you can also develop certain types of clairvoyance. There's certain types of what are called clairvoyance or abilities of the mind that we call paranormal in relation to us, which are actually not paranormal in relation to a Buddha. Just abilities to know things such as another person's mind, what they're thinking, and certain karmic connections. Oh, this is the result of this karmic action, or this karma will potentially lead to that result. So knowing that, and in that way, be able to effectively help for us to be careful with regard to our own karma and with others. But that's limited, only to certain. You don't know all karma. That's again something only a Buddha can know.
So why should I accept this notion of karma at all?
You shouldn't accept anything. You shouldn't accept anything that you're taught, but to at least have an openness that explains why things happen. Initially. Just maybe it's true, maybe not. But to allow that possibility. And then as you go on and you learn about Buddhism, at some point, and I'm just talking about myself, your faith, your belief in that, based on reasoning, grows deeper and deeper. Right? With past and future life, the same thing. I don't know, there's past and future life. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. So initially I was pretty undecided. But now I choose and I believe there is. I don't know, but I believe there is. And I tried to, it's difficult, but I tried to live as if there was. So be prepared. And if there's karmic results, well, better live as if there was. Okay? So live accordingly, and hopefully one day understand it. So it's always safe to pretend there is. And if there isn't, it's still good for you. Yeah. All right. Did we say last question? There were two more. Okay, what time is it actually? By the way, I forgot. 8:45. Yeah, it's been a long day, no? I mean, I'm happy to go, but it's easier to talk than to listen. So if there's nothing more,
May I ask something?
yeah. And there's more people. I keep ignoring. Actually, you haven't raised your. Sorry, she hasn't said anything. Please.
I was just wondering, you talked about jealousy and anger. What about sadness?
Sadness. Yes. Okay, sadness. So the question is, I've talked about jealousy, I talked about anger. What about sadness? What about depression? Now, actually, those types of mind are not mentioned in the same way as anger and jealousy, because anger and jealousy are more likely to make us do things that are potentially harmful to ourselves and others. Right? Out of jealousy, I may stop the other person's success. Out of anger, I may do, we all know what we do out of anger, etc. So it is not mentioned to the same degree, but sadness is still, well, it depends on the type of sadness.
I'm not talking about depression.
You're not talking about depression. Okay, just about sadness. Okay. Feeling sad, well, there's certain degrees of sadness. Now the question is, can it be helpful? Right? Can it be helpful? So sometimes, I mean, is it natural? Sure. It's natural for certain people to be sad. In general, usually us as humans, it's natural to become sad. Is it harmful? No, if it doesn't last for days on end, you come out of it, and it's natural. So I don't think, from a Buddhist point of view, oh my God, I'm sad. What is the antidote? No, it's okay. I mean, if someone dies close to us, it's a natural, it's a natural tendency to be sad, and I think we should allow ourselves and not to suppress it. However, sometimes, I've for the longest period of time, this question has come up again and again, and it's only been through one of my teachers who very much stressed this. In fact, it was very funny. I'll tell you this story. I was translating for this particular teacher, again, Geshe Kelsang, and he talked about how sick he got when he was studying Madhyamika, that he couldn't go to the debate, etc. And when he talked about it, I couldn't help it, but I started crying while I was translating. And then he said, some people, like a few minutes later, just briefly, I wasn't too long, so I could go on translating, but then he said, some people think being sad and crying is compassion. And I thought, oh my God, he is so right? Because oftentimes I cry and I feel, oh, I'm so compassionate because I'm crying about someone else's suffering. But that's not compassion. Now, this is just in the context, and it really taught me that compassion does not mean, and this is not what you're asking, but I'm just saying that in the context in particular of compassion, we think that compassion will make us sad, because if we think of all the suffering that sentient beings have, we will become sad. But that's a misunderstanding of what compassion is. Actually, when we see the suffering of another person, our reaction of compassion should be like, oh, I need to do something. This should not, I will do something. I need to take personal responsibility. It should give us courage. It should give us determination. I will do something. Because when we become sad, that doesn't necessarily arise, and we don't like to be sad. So maybe we associate being compassionate with sadness. So this was just this lesson I learned. First I was embarrassed. It's like, oh my God, oops. And of course, sure enough, I was thinking, I'm so compassionate. I'm crying because he has a problem, right? That was definitely my thought. And for the longest time, I thought, every time I heard, oh, I'm so compassionate, someone has a problem, I'm crying. Okay, I'm compassionate. And then he said it, and he said it out of compassion. He didn't say it. But I thought, oh my God, that is just me totally misunderstanding. It's like, instead of being, oh, it's like, come on, it's impermanent. I need to do something. It has a cause. If I can help to remove the cause, it should rather. So this is just with respect to. So it doesn't really help. It doesn't really help, at least not when it comes to compassion. So, but is it something that is harmful? No, neither. It's neither beneficial nor harmful. So if you ask like sadness of samsara, like awareness of samsara, but that is not so much a sadness. Yikyoa, they say. Yikyoa in Tibetan can mean sadness, but it's more like awareness of like, I got enough. I want to get out of it. It's not sadness as such. It is sometimes used in the context of sadness, but my understanding is when it's used, sadness of samsara really is more awareness of like, I got enough. I want out. Right? So in that way, it's not considered to be harmful, but also not helpful either. So not needed. Does that make sense? Natural, okay. Don't suppress it. Right? It's okay to be sad, but make sure you don't get drawn into depression to get out of it. And I'm not saying you, I'm saying just in general. And nothing to be worried about. Does that help a little bit? Yeah. Okay. I brought it up and I got around it when she said it was not depression. Okay, that's a difficult one. Depression, it depends on what it causes the depression. Okay. If it's not caused by a chemical imbalance, I meant, right? Because that's a different matter. If a chemical imbalance, well, then finding ways in regulating that imbalance would be advisable, whatever that means. But sadness, well, I mean, depression is definitely harmful. When the sadness can no longer be controlled and we fall into this habitual feeling sad, I mean, it takes away all our energy, it sucks our energy. Come on, we all know, we don't need to talk about the disadvantages. I mean, Buddhist practice becomes very difficult unless it gets us to become more compassionate and it turns things around and we want to work harder, but that usually doesn't happen. So therefore, definitely something harmful, but then how do you get out of it? Right? But again, like what caused the depression? If it's only chemical, different. But if something goes wrong and something else goes wrong and other things go wrong, well, actually, a lot goes right. Right? You know what's really good is living in India and getting sick. I mean, you get sick, the most bizarre things happen, you know, for days you're just throwing up and then the first day you get better, you go, oh my God, I'm better, right? I'm not throwing up. I can actually enjoy my food. So the things that I usually take for granted, suddenly I realize, or like where I live, it's all very bumpy and stuff. So once I sprained my ankle, I mean, I could not even get to buy something in the shop. It was really difficult. And when I felt better, it was like, oh my God, I got 2 legs. I can walk. I can just get up. So the little things that I take for granted, suddenly I saw how precious it is to have 2 arms and 2 legs. Right? And so we have this tendency to focus on what goes wrong and totally ignore what is right in our life. Okay? Now some people argue, well, that's because that's what the cave people did in order to enhance and to improve. It's a natural tendency to focus on the negative. Well, what did the cave people do? You know, why do we have the tendency of taking the elevator rather than taking the stairs? Because yes, in the cave, we had to preserve our energy. And so therefore, you know, it made more sense to go straight instead of climbing over a tree to get to the other side. Yes, but times have changed. So therefore, it is more advisable to take the stairs versus the elevator. So the cave thing doesn't work. So, therefore, to focus on the positive aspects in our life, right, is definitely a good solution to count our blessings, so to say, right? This is the expression. And seriously, when I sprained my ankle, afterwards, now I just need to remind myself when I feel depressed, I have 2 legs. In fact, my father's in a wheelchair. He has been for the last 14 years. Having a stroke, he can no longer speak. He can no longer move. I just need to think of my dad. If I had to be like that just for a day, all my other problems aren't, you know, they're nothing in comparison to that. So that's really helped me to put things into perspective. So if I just focus on what's wrong, of course I fall into a depression. But if I can train myself to look at what's right, then I find a lot more that is right with my life. Okay? But that's the matter, you need to train yourself. Sometimes I'm happy about being depressed. I feel really sorry for myself. And it feels good, because poor me. So I have that tendency too, so I need to recognize that. And I'm not saying depressed people do that. Please don't get me wrong. But I do know my own melancholy, like, you know, kind of like, oh, poor me. So sometimes it's hard to get out of it. But in the end, if you catch it early enough, and if it's not, like I said, chemically induced, if it basically just things go wrong in my life, well, there's a lot that goes right in my life, and it's just a matter of a different perspective. It's all relative. Okay, on that note. That should do, right? Okay, sorry. Yeah, but there's time till tomorrow. Yeah, okay, for those who didn't get. But let's spend a few moments. Dedicating whatever positive potential we accumulated throughout the entire day, and the positive potential everyone else accumulated throughout the entire day, let's dedicate it towards the well-being of all sentient beings. May this become the cause for all sentient beings to achieve lasting and true happiness. And may this become the cause for me, for us to become fully enlightened, so that we then finally have the potential to lead all sentient beings, to guide all sentient beings to that enlightened state. So with this attitude, let's recite the dedication prayers. לילה טוב, חלומות פס.